Welcome to Cloudy with a Chance of Trust, a podcast for digital transformation leaders where we discuss the latest cyber attack issues, enterprise security strategies, and current security events so that you can successfully accelerate network and security transformation. And now, here's what's on our mind this week.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Cloudy with a Chance of Trust, a podcast for transformative technology leaders. I'm your host, Pam Kubiatowski. I'm so excited today to welcome to the show Venkat. Venkat, please say your last name so I don't butcher it.
It's Lakshminarayanan.
Venkat, who was the former VP of Digital Technology Application Development at ServiceNow, is also an expert in AI ops, which I look so forward to discussing with you today, Venkat. You also, from what I understand, led various AI-based transformation initiatives at ServiceNow, and we'll hear your perspective on all that. I also am very happy to say that Venkat recently joined our team, our Zscaler family here, as one of the CTO in residence. And so we're happy to have you not only on the show with us today, but actually as part of the Zscaler family. So welcome.
Thank you, Pam. Thanks for having me.
Can you give our listeners a little touch into your background and your role at ServiceNow and what it entailed?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Pam. So I've been in ServiceNow for the last 6.5 years, and I started out as a director for network and systems. Then I ended up getting into the transforming the network, simplifying it and the systems, and then I ended up owning the entire infrastructure, be it SAP HANA, communications, everything that, including service desk, that I ended up owning all of that. So that actually helped me to do a lot of transformation across the board, from the endpoint to the cloud. So we call it as a client to cloud strategy. And one of the things we looked at is that anything we do has to be very simple, secure, and at scale. As ServiceNow is growing at a very fast pace, we want to be able to accelerate the business growth, enabling them, and at the same time, not expanding, having 1,000 people team to manage everything. That ended up actually looking at how do we make it self-healing? How do we solve a lot of problems? So that is how we ended up actually doing a lot of self-healing initiatives, and we ended up acquiring some AI technology to integrate the ServiceNow platform. And I can talk a lot more as we progress.
That's interesting. So let's dive into that. What does really self-healing infrastructure, what does that really mean? Because people out there are like, what is he talking about? How is it healing itself? Can you give us a little look into that?
Sure, I can. It is a pinnacle of operational excellence, right? And you want to build systems that can actually predict, prevent, and auto resolve issues before it breaks. So we ended up having a strategy, an organizational strategy that we said we will do 3 zeros. So we call it as 3-0 strategy. And one is zero data center, because ServiceNow being a SaaS company, we don't want any physical data footprint for the corporate infrastructure. And then we wanted to have zero unplanned outages. And then the third zero is zero user reported issues. And so we ended up actually shutting down all the data centers. And then we added a fourth zero that became a 3 zeros, versus the zero trust.
So when you actually talk about zero user outages, is that your employees of ServiceNow, or is that your customer base?
It is employees of ServiceNow, because I was responsible for the corporate infrastructure. So it is predominantly focused on our internal employees and contractors and partners.
Awesome. And so you touched on it, because my next question was going to be, because you touched on it, where does the concept of zero trust fit into a self-healing architecture? Are they separate, or you kind of made it seem like it's related?
It is related in a sense, because the key to success in a self-healing infrastructure is to simplify it. When you simplify it, that means you need to have a zero trust architecture, and at the same time you're also securing it. So it is the part and parcel of the entire strategy. It is not that you can do one over other, but you have to look at your infrastructure as a whole, a service as a whole, from how it is works from the client all the way to the application stack. And that is where you find opportunities to simplify it, and zero trust plays a key role there.
Some believe, and I'd love your take on this, some believe that SaaS-based platforms started off completely virtual, right? As a SaaS-based solution. What I thought was really interesting, what I'm starting to find is a lot of SaaS-based platforms, solutions actually started in a somewhat maybe hybrid legacy world that then were modernized. What are your thoughts on that, or what have you seen?
Yeah, so my experience, I've implemented Salesforce before. I know ServiceNow platform very well. I implemented Zscaler at ServiceNow. All the SaaS companies, it's time to market is very important.
Mhm.
So, some of them started off building everything ground up, being a SaaS from the day one. Some of them wanted to catch up to the market, so they took their existing, appliance-based stuff and put it in a cloud and call it as a SaaS. So there is a differentiator there. So that is one of the decision making when I was trying to find any solution. That's one of the things we looked at. Is it built ground up, or it
Mhm.
is patched? Because I come from earlier before ServiceNow, I worked for FireEye, and we did similar things that we took an appliance and put it on a cloud. And
Right.
nothing wrong about it. It is about time to market, right? How quick you
Mhm.
can get to the market and call yourself a SaaS solution.
Right, right. So a little bit earlier, you touched on AI and ML. And can you talk about how that actually fits into a self-healing IT infrastructure?
Yes, of course. So we cannot actually build a self-healing infrastructure without actually having A&ML. Because the modern systems, when you have a good observability platform or you have a SaaS platform that you actually have APIs to collect a lot of telemetry, you have to have a predictive engine that actually connects the dot. Say, for example, you have an endpoint. I'm using Zoom, for example. I'm on a Zoom call, and there is something happening on my laptop could impact the quality of my Zoom call. Or there could be something happening upstream in the network that could impact the quality of my call. Or there's something happening in the Zoom platform itself could impact. So all these telemetry has to be collected and then made sense out of. Humans cannot do it. So you need to have a predictive engine that can predict. So what you do is you don't build a self-healing engine ground up. You leverage the existing intelligence from your platform providers. For example, the Zoom or Zscaler instance, you use their ZDX that gives you endpoint telemetry, or you have an API into Zoom platform, bring in the mask scores and the telemetry about your call quality. So you federate it, and then you can actually predict and prevent.
I think it's all about, to your point, it's interesting of how the integrations, the various platforms actually participate in being able to build a self-healing architecture. So let's talk about a little bit about what does it really look like in practice? Because a lot of listeners out there may be questioning, is it really realistic? Oh, okay, you did it at ServiceNow, but you may have had a ton of money. You were a SaaS-based solution, but really, what's needed to achieve a self-healing architecture? And you started touching on it already.
Yes, thank you. So, see, self-healing instruction is about actually first having visibility into what is happening in your ecosystem. That means having a right observability platform, getting all the signals, because the more signals you get, the more predictability it is. Then the engine can learn. So that means either if it's on-prem infrastructure, you have a good observability platform, you can bring in all the telemetry you want, or if it's a SaaS platform, you work with the vendors to build an API and so that you can actually get the data from their backend. And not they may not let you grab all the data, but you can grab a certain relevant data. But end of the day, bringing all the data, and also one of the transformation that happened in IT operations, that you now need data engineers and AI engineers to be able to actually understand the data and build models.
Ben, I think it's so interesting because, I'm going to date myself 10, 15 years ago, even for that matter, longer. Organizations struggled immensely. at taking the data they had and making some form of intelligent decisions from it. AI and ML has truly changed so much for so many organizations. I guess the question comes down to then, the data fabrics, the data lakes that are created to house all this data. Is that an issue, or was that an issue for you when you've been able to do this previously?
Yeah, yes, of course it is because the lot of legacy infrastructure doesn't support an API, does not actually give you the enough logs or telemetry that you can actually make any sense out of it. So some of the legacy applications have transformed, and then you have third-party application monitoring tools that can actually give you more telemetry than the application itself. So you leverage a combination of these tools because there's no one platform that can provide everything, and you can say, hey, I can self-heal everything. No, it doesn't happen. And so you have to pick what is a business critical application and what is a large volume drivers. Then you look at what are the components that enables that service or delivers that application. It could be a network switch in the middle. It could be an SD-WAN router in the middle, or it could be a client, a VPN client on your endpoint. So then once you understand all the components, then you can start collecting data and then stitching them together.
That is so interesting to me because so many listening are going to be stuck in that legacy world, right? Like that you just touched on, with a lot of legacy architecture still that they're trying to transform and change. They may have newer technologies they're bringing in that are offsetting some of the legacy, but they're kind of caught in the old world, new world. When you're kind of caught in between those worlds, what are some of the key elements that make you successful?
Thank you. That is a very good question. As I mentioned, right, you can't buy the ocean and you can't self-fill everything, right? You pick the right application or the business driver. And then once you understand the landscape and you understand what is available, what is legacy, what is modern, then you can build tools around it to collect data as much as you can. And then you need to be able to actually have enough data to be able to predict and prevent stuff and also self-heal, right? And so that is where it's very important. Don't go and try to boil the ocean. And also, it will be a large undertaking, then it will end up in a failure. So you pick, baby steps at a time, right? You pick one volume driver or one key application. It could be an ERP or it could be a sales, application, something that is very important for running the business.
So that's all about tech. But let's face it, right? Tech doesn't run without the administrators. What did you see from an administrator, from a technician perspective, that you found you needed to potentially add to your organization or focus them with being able to focus on identifying, number one, what is that app that you're going to focus on self-healing with the infrastructure and so forth?
Yeah. Thank you, Pam. So, see, one of the things in my experience, when I started as a system administrator 30 years back, I had a boss. He used to tell, hey, if it runs, don't touch it. That's no longer valid. If it runs, let's make it better.
Right.
So, and that mindset has to change. You can bring in the latest of the technology, but if you don't have the right people with the right mindset, it's not going to be a successful implementation. We have to have the right people with the right mindset, and also many of the jobs that existed before. We used to have a backup administrators. We used to have system administrators who are like managing only NT systems and things like that. They no longer exist. Now you have engineers who are DevOps engineers or they are infrastructure engineers. They can actually write code and solve problems. And more importantly, with the proliferation of AI, you need data engineers and data scientists in your team. Operations is no longer about administrators. It is about having these set of skills in your team to be able to successfully, deliver self-healing.
It is key that the technician role of yesterday does have to evolve. But some of them out there listening, and I know this in my own past, when we started talking about transforming, You may have lifers in your organizations, and those who listen to this podcast know I talk about the lifers I had previously in my organization and how important they are to an organization, right? Because they're the ones, they know where a lot of the band-aids are. They know where a lot of as we talk about, the body's buried, right? In the network and so forth. And it's really key to make sure that they know that there's still a need for them, that they are a integral part of the operations running while they're allowing for these others to potentially start to learn, right? To your point, how to start to focus on the DevOps and to start to change and expand their knowledge to be able to actually work on and successfully implement a self-healing environment.
Yes, exactly. See, the human race thrived on survivability, right? So it
Hmm.
comes to the job. Same, it doesn't matter. It's a technical job or any job. You have to adapt to the technology, and some of the stuff, like for example, the network engineers of the yesterdays, they create manual routes. Now you don't need to. The network infrastructure has actually been modernized. The platform has become more intelligent. Now it can create its own routes on dynamically. The network as a platform has gone through a lot of transformation. The architecture has simplified, and even the traditional network vendors have adopted to an intelligent platform. Now you don't need to go and manually create these routes. Even earlier, when you want to plug something into a corporate switch, you had to go and manually identify the port and actually add it to the right VLAN and apply the right policies. Now you don't have to. You go and plug. The system is so intelligent that it actually detect and automatically applies the policy, puts in the right VLAN or whatnot, and it all works. So the traditional network administrator's job of actually configuring these ports no longer exists. So the people have to adapt to survive, and most of them do. Even the lifers have seen that writing on the wall. And as leaders, what we need to do is enable them to learn, give them the resources to learn and adapt.
And I think, Venkat, you make a point there. I think, though, that the technology has become so intelligent. 2 points, right? I want to key on with what you just said. One, we're simplifying, the intelligence is able to simplify the architecture, which goes back to a zero trust. But even though it has simplified the architecture, it has increased the security posture because the simplification has allowed for true um, understanding of what you have, what you're securing, right? Because you have the right visibility into all of it, which, quite frankly, most organizations, when they start to unravel what they did in the past as they're transforming into more of a zero trust architecture, they start to identify things that are like, oh, wow, I didn't know we had this. Oh, wow, this was not secured. Oh, wow, we haven't patched that, right? Because we didn't even know we had it, and the complexities that they put in place to secure the organizations made them more vulnerable because not everything was truly secured, right?
Yeah.
Venkat, you also touched on another important point without saying it. And I want to make sure we call this out that we have really automated so much, and technology has come so far with automations and is intelligent in so many ways. We also, though, have to set the right expectations with the business and with our C-suites, our boards, that this is technology. And there are times in which technology breaks for whatever reasons, right? We recently had a massive, a peer of ours had a massive outage, and it was a very short outage, but it was a very impactful outage, right? That can happen to anyone, any company, doesn't matter whether you're a SaaS base, a hardware provider, a manufacturer, a retailer, it can happen to anyone. We rely so much on software nowadays to run the world and all of these systems that sometimes I think we forget that we need to continuously reset expectation of what does that really mean.
Yeah. So see, the one part of the transformation happening is that we are simplifying the network. We are simplifying a lot of stuff. At the same time, the simplification means that we are also actually writing complex code to simplify it.
Right.
And earlier, when the UAT and all this stuff happened, there are people who used to test manually. And then there's a lot of automation suite has come. But the problem when it comes to endpoint, you have so many agents on your endpoint. And because they are all a lot of point solutions that doing point things to, trying to secure your endpoint, which is always mobile. And that is where the consolidated testing is very important. And in many cases, when you have auto updates turned on from the vendor side, it could break things. So one of the things I've done is that in my past career, that I also own the endpoint engineering. So we usually don't let an auto update get pushed immediately. We were building an automated test suite that actually tests any new updates on our environment to reduce the impact of any bad updates going into and breaking things. Is it foolproof? Not yet, right? But I think eventually we'll get there with an automated test suite that you can actually test it more on a real time and then push it, because sometimes when you have 0 day, every minute counts.
Right.
And yeah, so that is where having a simplified zero trust architecture, even though your endpoint might get compromised, but it won't let a lateral movement. It stops a lateral movement. So there are a lot of combination things that you can do to secure it and also reduce the impact of something happened like last 2 weeks back.
Right. So tell me, in your experience of doing this, how does cloud complicate or simplify? I mean, again, you guys are a cloud-based solution, but how do you see, for your experience and others, does cloud complicate or simplify implementing a self-healing architecture?
No, it actually simplified it. In a sense, it also depends on what we plan to do, right? Because the cloud providers, most of them have APIs that you can actually bring in telemetry. And you don't actually manage and each device, when you have your own on-prem infrastructure or an application, you are responsible for managing everything there, including patching a switch or a BIOS upgrade on a server and things like that. That's all gone now because you are actually consuming the application as a service, and the service providers are responsible for managing that and their ecosystem. We believe it's like more resilient, that you don't have to worry about all these things. But you need to bring in telemetry to be able to predict what's happening or provide the best user experience to your users. So that is where you play a big role. I'm very fortunate and lucky enough that part of being ServiceNow, being a well-known enterprise software, I was able to dictate and actually get API built with the new vendors we brought in, including that same thing I did with Zscaler, because I'm one of the early adopters. We said first thing is we need an API.
Right. And so many thank you for that. Yeah. Right. Well, listen, Venkat, this has been wonderful. This has been really an enlightened conversation to get to understand more about self-healing infrastructures and where do you start and so forth. I think, at this point, we're going to break this episode so that we're going to ask you back, like we talked about in the beginning, so that we can actually focus on, when you look at a self-healing architecture, how does it influence CapEx and OpEx? What should you be taking into consideration? What should be and how should you be addressing your C-suite and the board when you're starting to think about something like this? And when you're looking at going ahead and taking that business case up, because you actually already started alluding to the fact that you're going to bring in various potential tools that will help you, right, create this self-healing architecture or for the specific, maybe it's a crown jewel application or so forth. We're going to get into that in a little more detail in the next episode. So for all of you listening, Venkat, thank you so much. This was great. I look forward to our conversation in the future. And to everyone listening, thanks so much for sharing your time with us. Stay tuned in the next episode with Venkat on self-healing architectures. Thanks again for joining Cloudy with a Chance of Trust. Take care.
Thank you, Pen. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Cloudy with a Chance of Trust. Check back with your podcast provider regularly for more episodes. Statements by Zscaler podcasters and guests are informational only and should never be construed as legal advice. You should consult with your legal advisor on matters related to you or your business. Zscaler makes no warranties, express, implied, or statutory as to the content of this podcast, and it is provided as is. Content on this podcast may contain forward-looking statements that are current as of the date of recording and subject to change. These statements are subject to the safe harbor provisions created by the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. Full legal disclaimers are available at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Copyright 2022.